There's something that happens to a lot of people after 60, and most don't notice it at first. It doesn't feel like a big change. It doesn't feel like something is wrong. It feels like small adjustments your body starts making without asking you. Getting up from a chair takes a little more effort. Walking upstairs feels slightly different. Meals don't sit the same way they used to, and at first you ignore it, because it feels normal. But over time, those small changes start stacking. And one day, you realize something uncomfortable. Your body doesn't respond like it used to. Now here's what most people assume. They say, "This is just aging." But what if that explanation is incomplete? Because in recent years, researchers studying metabolism and aging have started paying attention to something most people never think about in daily life: the gut. And I don't mean just digestion. I mean a complex internal system that may influence how the body handles energy, appetite signals, inflammation responses, and even how stable your day-to-day energy feels. Now, before we go any further, I want to be very clear. This video is not medical advice. It does not diagnose, treat, or cure anything. What we are looking at is emerging research in nutrition science and lifestyle patterns, and how small daily habits may support healthier aging over time. But here's where it gets interesting, because today, I'm going to show you something extremely simple. A 24-hour gut health experiment. Not a diet, not a supplement plan. Just a short way to observe how your body responds when you make small, controlled changes. And most people don't expect much from something like this until they try it. Now here's a question I want you to keep in your mind the entire time. If aging feels different for everyone, what is actually driving those differences? Same age, same generation, sometimes even similar lifestyle, but completely different energy, mobility, and independence. Why? Now don't answer that yet, because the answer may not be what most people think. And we're going to build toward it step by step. Today we're going through 7 simple habits and foods, often discussed in gut health and aging research, ranked from number 7 to number 1. But don't think of this as a list. Think of it as a chain reaction, because each item affects the next one. And by the time we reach number 1, you may completely rethink something you already eat every week. Now let's start. But before we do, something important. Most people expect health videos like this to be complicated. Too many rules, too many restrictions, too much information. This isn't that. This is about small, realistic patterns that quietly build over time. And sometimes, those are the most powerful ones. Let me ask you something simple. Have you ever noticed that 2 people the same age can look completely different physically, even if they never had any major illness? One seems steady, active, independent. The other seems like everything takes more effort. That difference didn't happen suddenly. It built slowly. And the strange part is, most people never connect it to daily habits like the ones we're about to discuss. Keep that thought, because we're starting with something that looks almost too simple to matter. Before we start at number 7, this one seems like it has nothing to do with gut health at all, but it quietly affects everything that comes after it. Let's begin. Let's start with water. It sounds almost too simple to include in a list like this, but hydration plays a foundational role in digestion and how the body processes food. As people get older, the body becomes more sensitive to dehydration, and that can show up in ways many don't immediately connect. Feeling slower after meals, mild fatigue that feels normal, or digestion that feels less comfortable than before. Water helps support the environment where digestion happens. It keeps things moving through the system more smoothly. But here's what most people don't realize. Water supports digestion, but it does not directly feed the gut bacteria researchers often study in relation to metabolism and aging. It helps the system function, but it is not the fuel. And that distinction matters more than it seems, because the next habit is where things begin to shift from support to fuel. But even then, most people misunderstand it completely, because if hydration is just the foundation, then what actually feeds the system inside your gut? Most people think they already know the answer. They usually don't. Now we move to something most people think they understand, but almost nobody uses correctly. Now we move to fiber, found in vegetables, fruits, oats, beans, and whole foods. Fiber is widely known for supporting digestion and regularity, but in nutrition science it plays a deeper role. It acts as a substrate for beneficial gut bacteria. In simple terms, it helps feed them. But here's where it gets interesting. Fiber is not a single thing. It is a category of many different compounds. And different fibers feed different types of gut bacteria, which means something important. Two people can both eat fiber, but still have completely different gut responses, because variety matters as much as quantity. And this is where things start to get subtle, because small differences over time may influence how the body feels day to day. But now we move into something unexpected, because the next habit has nothing to do with what you eat. What if one of the most important gut-related habits is something you're already doing every day, without even thinking about it? This next habit looks too simple to matter, but researchers in lifestyle medicine keep bringing it up again and again. Now this one surprises people. Walking after meals. Not exercise, not training, just light movement, even 10 to 15 minutes after eating. Research in lifestyle and metabolic studies suggests this may support how the body handles food after meals, how digestion feels, and how smoothly the system transitions after eating. For many adults over 60, this becomes more relevant over time, because the body doesn't always respond to meals the same way it used to. But here's the key idea. This isn't about weight loss. It's about transition, helping the body shift from eating mode back to rest mode. Now think about this carefully. If movement after meals matters, what happens when movement is missing for long periods? And even more importantly, what happens inside the body when you're not moving at all? That question leads somewhere most people never connect to gut health. But we will, because the next habit is happening even when you are doing absolutely nothing. And most people never realize its influence until much later. We left off with an important question. If movement after meals affects how the body processes food, what happens when the body is not moving at all? Not for minutes, but for hours, especially overnight, because that's where things get interesting. And most people never think about it this way. Let me ask you something simple. Have you ever noticed how some mornings you wake up feeling refreshed, and other mornings you feel like your body is still catching up? Same sleep duration, different feeling. Why? Keep that question in mind, because the next habit may help explain part of it. This next habit is something everyone does, but very few people understand its connection to digestion and gut balance. And it happens every single night. Now let's talk about sleep. Sleep is often seen as simple rest. But in modern nutrition and physiology research, sleep is increasingly viewed as a regulatory cycle, a system reset, not just for the brain, but for multiple processes in the body, including those connected to digestion and appetite signaling. Some research suggests that gut bacteria also follow daily rhythms, similar to a biological clock. So when sleep becomes inconsistent, studies have observed associations with changes in appetite regulation, shifts in energy levels, differences in food timing and cravings. Now, to be very clear, this does not mean sleep directly controls weight. Human biology is far more complex than that. But it may influence how the body manages signals related to hunger and recovery. And for many adults over 60, sleep often becomes lighter or more fragmented over time, which can make mornings feel less stable. But here's where things get more interesting, because the next habit is not about sleep at all. It's about when your body gets a break from food entirely. Because what if the issue isn't what you eat, but how often your body is processing food without rest? This next habit sounds simple, but it completely changes how the body cycles through the day. And most people misunderstand it completely. Now let's talk about meal timing. Some nutrition research has explored time-restricted eating patterns, which simply means having a consistent window during the day when you eat, and allowing a longer overnight break from food. This is not about skipping meals aggressively, and it is not about restriction. It is about rhythm, giving the body a predictable cycle of intake and rest. Some studies suggest this pattern may be associated with more stable daily energy patterns, improved digestive rhythm in some individuals, alignment with natural circadian processes. But here's the important part. This area of research is still evolving, and results vary significantly between individuals. Now here's what makes this interesting, because the next habit introduces something completely different, something that doesn't rely on timing, or movement, or sleep. It involves food itself, but in a way most people never expect. Because what if food is not just fuel, but something that interacts with living systems inside your body? This next category has been part of traditional diets for centuries, but only recently studied in modern science. And it may change how you think about healthy foods. Now we move to fermented foods, like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi. These foods have been consumed in many cultures for generations. And in nutrition research, they are often studied because they contain naturally occurring cultures formed through fermentation. Now let's be careful here. We are not claiming these foods fix anything, and they do not affect everyone the same way. But they are frequently discussed in research related to gut microbial diversity, dietary patterns associated with healthy aging, digestive comfort in some individuals. And here's what makes this interesting for older adults. As we age, the composition of gut bacteria may naturally shift over time, due to diet, lifestyle, and aging processes. So dietary diversity becomes more important. But there's something many people miss. Fermented foods are not just about nutrition. They are about introducing live biological activity into the diet. And that changes the conversation entirely. But now we reach the final step. And this is where everything connects. Because the number one habit is not about adding something new. It is about changing something familiar, something you already eat. And when you hear it, you may realize you've been doing it the normal way your entire life, without knowing there was another option. Because the final habit starts with one of the most common foods on earth, rice, potatoes, and almost nobody prepares them this way. We've reached the final part of this video, and this is usually where people expect something complicated, something expensive, something they've never heard before. But the truth is, the most interesting part of today's topic is almost the opposite of that. And that's exactly why most people overlook it. Because the brain is wired to trust things that feel complex, and ignore things that feel too simple. Now before we get into the final habit, I want to bring you back to the core idea of this entire video. Everything we've discussed so far, hydration, fiber, walking after meals, sleep rhythms, meal timing, fermented foods, was never separate information. It was all pointing toward one system, the gut environment, and more importantly, how that system responds not to single actions, but to repeated patterns over time. Now here's where things get more interesting, because the final habit is not something new. It is something you already interact with every single week. But almost nobody connects it to gut health. And that is where the insight is hidden. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how two people the same age can look and feel completely different? Same generation, same general lifestyle, but one person feels steady, active, independent, while the other feels like everything takes more effort than it used to. Now here's the uncomfortable question most people avoid. What actually caused that difference? Most people immediately say genetics, or luck, or just aging. But researchers studying metabolism and long-term dietary patterns are asking something more specific. What if the difference is not one big factor, but thousands of small daily interactions that accumulate silently? Keep that idea in mind, because it connects directly to what comes next. And most people never see it coming. Now I want you to think of something extremely ordinary. Rice, potatoes, bread in some cases, foods that appear in millions of meals every single day. Now here's the strange part. Most people only think about these foods at one moment, when they are hot, fresh, ready to eat. But almost nobody pays attention to what happens after that moment. And that's where the story actually begins. Now let's slow this down and look carefully. When starchy foods like rice or potatoes are cooked, their internal structure becomes soft, easy, and rapidly digestible. That's why freshly cooked food feels satisfying immediately. It is designed to be easy for the body to process. But here is the part almost nobody thinks about. When those same foods are cooled, something subtle begins to change at a structural level. Not visible, not obvious, but measurable in food science. Some of the starch begins to reorganize into a form that is less rapidly digestible. In nutrition science, this is often discussed as resistant starch formation. Now I want to pause here for an important clarification. This is not a miracle mechanism. It is not a medical treatment. And it is not something that produces dramatic effects overnight. It is simply a known food chemistry process that researchers continue to study in relation to digestion and gut microbiome interactions. Now here is where the curiosity deepens. Because not all carbohydrates behave the same way in the digestive system. Freshly cooked starch is typically broken down earlier in digestion. But when starch becomes more resistant, a portion may travel further through the digestive system before being fully processed. And that is where it begins to interact with the large intestine environment. Now I want you to hold that idea, because this is where most people misunderstand the topic. They expect a result. But what researchers actually observe is a pattern, not a sudden change. A gradual interaction between food structure and gut activity. And that difference matters more than most people realize. Let me ask you something very simple. How many meals in your life have included rice or potatoes? Not a few, not occasionally, but regularly, for years. Now imagine, if a small difference in preparation was happening across thousands of meals without you ever noticing. Not dramatically changing anything, but subtly changing the conditions each time. That's the kind of question modern nutrition research is starting to explore. Not transformation, but accumulation. Now let's make this practical. Very simple. No complexity. No extreme rules. Just observation. For one day, you cook rice or potatoes the way you normally would. Then, instead of eating them immediately, you allow them to cool, preferably overnight in the refrigerator. And the next day, you eat them as part of a normal meal. That's it. No restrictions. No diet structure, just one small variation in preparation. Now here is where most people misunderstand this entirely. The goal is not to force a result. The goal is to observe response. Because most people go through life eating on autopilot. They never pause long enough to notice subtle changes in how their body reacts. But when you introduce awareness, something important happens. You begin noticing details that were always there, but never conscious. How you feel after meals. How your energy shifts later in the day. How your digestion feels in small, almost unnoticeable ways. And here is the key point. Even if nothing changes physically, your awareness changes. And awareness is often the first step in behavior change. Because here is something most people only realize later in life. Health is rarely shaped by big dramatic decisions. It is shaped by small patterns repeated over time. Meals, movement, sleep, timing, food structure. None of them feel powerful alone. But together, they form the baseline your body operates on every single day. And over time, that baseline becomes your normal. At the end of the day, this video was never really about rice, or potatoes, or any single habit we discussed. It was about something deeper. Understanding that the body is not static. It responds, it adapts, and it reflects patterns over time. And sometimes, the smallest inputs are the ones people underestimate the most, because they don't look important enough to matter. Now let me leave you with one final question. Not a health tip, not a rule, just a question. Which part of your daily routine have you been repeating for years, without ever questioning how it might be shaping your body over time? Because often, the most important changes are not the ones we add. They are the ones we finally start noticing. And once you see them, you can't unsee them again.